My name is Paul Lincoln, and I'm your host for Soil Matters, a podcast from the British Society of Soil Science, the professional body for soil scientists in the UK. Welcome to the 8th episode, and today I'm delighted to welcome Professor Paul Hallett. Paul is the president of the British Society of Soil Science. Paul is professor in soil physics at the University of Aberdeen, where he's working on solutions to food and environmental security. His focus is on the interaction between plants, microorganisms, and the physical behavior of soil. Paul's work spans understanding the fundamental processes driving changes in soil physical processes by biology through to applied research examining soil degradation and the underlying causes. Paul also teaches 2 of the senior soil science courses at the University of Aberdeen, and he was previously the program tutor of the MSc in soil science. Paul also coordinates postgraduate research training for over 120 PhD students in the School of Biological Sciences. Paul, welcome.
Hello.
Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself. And firstly, I'd like to ask you how you became a soil scientist.
So that's a question I get asked quite a lot. A soil scientist isn't a very commonly known profession. As a teenager, I had no idea that soil science actually even existed as a discipline. I had it's quite inspiring geography teacher. He taught us a lot about environmental challenges. We also learned a bit about soil and also land use as well. Flip side of that, my father worked for a mining company in Canada, and they were responsible for a lot of the environmental degradation there. And when I was looking at courses to study at university, he said if I wanted to protect the environment and do something useful, I could look into cleaning up contaminated land and restoring degraded areas. So I looked around for a degree. I didn't actually sign up to soil science to begin with. I signed up to a degree in resources management at the University of Guelph, which happened to be in their School of Agriculture. And this was in a broader department called land resource science. So in my first year, I took a few soil science courses. I didn't really like it then. I thought it was very descriptive, very much what does soil look like, rather than what do soils do and why are they important. But then in the second year, I enrolled in a course called co-op education, which meant we went out and got professional workplace during our undergraduate degrees. So I worked for an environmental consulting company. It was actually set up by a former soil science lecturer from the university. And I got placed with a lot of soil scientists helping them with field work. So that included looking at phosphorus pollution in the Great Lakes, degradation of land through the construction of utility corridors, and also reclamations of old mines and quarries and other things as well. This got me hooked on soil science. I went back to the university, signed up for every single course I could find. I realized then that I was in a powerhouse of soil science. So at the time in the 1980s, land resource science was arguably one of the top 5 in the world, I think, in soil science. And then my interest just grew and grew from there through to a PhD and now to where I am at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you. Now, tell us a bit about the work leading up to the time at the University of Aberdeen. Tell us about what the focus for that work has been.
In my kind of final year of university, I was still working in this environmental consulting company, and I worked there as my first real job. I realized that to get ahead, I probably needed a master's. So I looked around, registered or tried to apply for a few of them. And then I saw a PhD advertised at SILSO Research Institute, which was the old Agricultural Engineering Research Institute in the UK. And I got offered the position. So it was a quite niche topic. I found it actually quite difficult. It was on some quite fundamental processes in soil physics, but it really set me up well, I think, for my career ahead of that. So I did a brief postdoc at SILSO Research Institute, and then I think because of the specializations I had, I got employed quite soon after that into a permanent position at what was called the Scottish Crop Research Institute, which has since become part of the James Hutton Institute. When I joined SCRI, it was a group that was really, really young. I mean, most of the people in the whole team were in their 30s, and they worked at an interface between soil physics and biology. So this was a new emerging discipline called soil biophysics. And a lot of that early work that I did was on how microbes interact with soil properties, really how microbes can work to change the complete behavior of soils. And it moved more and more into how plants were also involved in this. There's one project we had with geotechnical engineers, and this looked at slope stabilization. And I gained a broader and broader amount of expertise, including on working on projects related directly to soil degradation as well. Anyway, during my time when I was at SCRI, I started to move up the management chain more and more. I first headed the plant soil interface group. And then on 2011, the same day that my son was born, the James Hutton Institute was formed. And there I was given a post of leading the research on sustainable production systems, which in simple terms is basically sustainable agriculture. So I did that for a couple of years. And then in 2013, I was recruited by the University of Aberdeen.
So tell us then your main areas of work over the past 10, 12, 13 years at the university.
Yeah, so the university research has continued a lot of what I did prior to joining. A lot of work on plants and how they interact in soil, more work on soil degradation, which was, I think, much more applied. And then also more work as well on using vegetation to stabilize slopes, try to decrease erosion, and other ways to regenerate soils as well. But a job at a university is about, they'll tell you different figures, but it's basically about a third administration, a third teaching, and a third research. I won't tell you much about the administration because it's not interesting, but I will tell you about the teaching and also my research activities. So teaching was something I really wanted to do, and that was a big driver for me to join the university. I'm pretty lucky with the teaching I've been given. I've been given 2 senior level soil science courses. One I inherited from various predecessors, which looks a lot more at how soils are formed, how they function within the broader environment, and soil survey and land classification approaches as well. The other course is much more on fundamental processes that happen in soil and how those interact with plants as well. The other course I teach very briefly on, which I really enjoy, is a first-year practical. And this lets me teach every single undergraduate across the School of Biological Sciences and a few more. So it's about 190 students. And I take them through soil science. So I like that one because it's a chance to give them that hook to get interested in soil science from very early on in their degrees. So the other bit of my job is supervising PhD students. That's really the link between teaching and research. So there's about 10 PhD students in my group at the moment, and they're conducting a broad range of projects, I should say, looking at how plant roots and soil interact as ways to regenerate soil structure, improve fertility, also affect biodiversity. There's projects looking at soil degradation more broadly within Scotland, and also internationally as well, and also projects looking at pollutants in soil, such as microplastics. And along with those PhD students are some postdoctoral scientists, and they're looking specifically at some of these topics, including microplastics, pollinators that live in soil, new generations of crops as well that could provide more sustainable systems for farmers in regions like Ethiopia or other countries where farmers are much more on a subsistence level.
And tell us a bit about where you think your work might develop at the university over the next couple of years.
So much more of the work now is interdisciplinary. So I work closely, obviously, with lots of people from different soil disciplines, so molecular biology, plant scientists as well, but also with social scientists and also economists. And being part of a big team like that is really interesting. You collect far more comprehensive data, it's much more holistic, and you can solve much bigger challenges. There are various international projects where it's part of a broader international team. There's a project in Ethiopia right now where we're looking at land degradation and the ways that we can use types of plants, ones particularly that are underutilized, so they've been lost from that biodiversity within the country, as a way to both benefit the environment and also benefit farmers at the same time. And then more of my work as well, I think, is going to look more at some of the fundamental processes and working much more with experts looking at, is regenerative farming actually working? What does it do to the soil? How can we come up with systems that are actually better for the sustainability of this, very important resource?
Now, let's talk a little bit about your role as president of the society. You're about halfway through your time as president. Tell us a bit about some of the highlights of your first year.
So there's been quite a few highlights. I'm going to give you a politician's answer first, but I will go on from that. So one of the great things about being within the presidential team of BS Cubed is there's a huge amount of support. You do a 6-year term, 2 years of that as president-elect, 2 years as president, and 2 years as past president. So you get to learn from the presidents before you. And obviously, when you finish, you pass on some of your knowledge to the next team. So working within the broader presidential team has been absolutely great. I learned a lot from the predecessors, Jack Hannam, who was the last president, Bruce Lascelles, who was the president before her. And then you're also part of another broader team, which is the exec team. That's expanded quite a lot over the past 3 or 4 years. They really get the day work done. So you're able to be quite strategic in the role. The other thing that's also a big highlight is getting to know the membership. The membership is incredibly important to everything that we do. What I realized is it's changed a lot from my early British Society of Soil Science days, where we were just, a smaller group of just soil scientists. We've got a lot of people from industry, from government. We have artists who are members now, teachers, and it's a very, very diverse membership that we have. So the big goal I've had, and hopefully it's starting to show, was to make the membership more worthwhile to the people who are members and make sure that we're serving everyone with that. After all, we are a membership organization. So one of the things that I noticed is there's certain elements of soil science where we've got either weak engagement or we've got fewer members than we should have from that area. So soil biology is one example of that. We attended a conference called Rhizosphere last year, which I was one of the organizers of. And a reason for that was really to connect with these people who are specialists on that interface between soil science and biological sciences. So rhizosphere is a term for this little thin zone of soil that's around the surface of plant roots. It's incredibly important to plant production. It's also incredibly important to soils because that's where a lot of substrate comes into soils. It's where soils get rebuilt by plants. And so it's incredibly important in terms of soil sustainability as well. Another conference we went to is Eurosoil. That is a conference that brings together all of the European societies of soil science. The other massive win that we had from Eurosoil is that we won the bid to host the next Eurosoil conference in 2028, which is going to be held in Edinburgh. Something else that happened last year, not all of this is down to me, is we've had activities diversified. So there was a policy subgroup that was set up. So Jack Hannam, my predecessor, is to credit for that. I'm working on another subgroup looking at education. And what I've noticed in the sector is that we all work slightly in competition. There's not enough soil science going on in the UK for us to work kind of in isolation. So I want to bring together a range of different higher education and further education institutes, help us share resources, work out best teaching practices. Soil science is now part of many different degrees. So hopefully provide resources that these people can use as well. So the other thing is, as a team effort, it's great to see some of the awards that were received. So there were things like the ABCO awards that went for the Best Association Events team, which went to very much to the exec team, and also the Women Leaders Awards, which went to Jack Hannam as well.
So let me ask you also, and I'm going to ask the same question from two different points of view. I wanted to ask you what has been most challenging for the society over the past year. But also, I wondered if you'd answer the question of what has been most challenging for soil science generally over this past year.
So I'll start with the society. And we had, over the past, I guess, 2 years, there were quite a few challenges that we had. So the year before I became president, we had an executive director who helped basically transform the entire society. So we went from a kind of smaller organization, kind of run mainly by members and a voluntary presidential team, had a tiny bit of support behind it. And we hired someone who was an expert in running a membership organization. That was Sarah Gary. She really, really put the society onto its current track. She announced that she got a better job. So she went to that. You kind of have that risk when you employ really, really good people. Anyway, we had a bit of a period without an executive director, but we appointed a new executive director who's Andy Morris. He came in also with that great expertise on managing a membership organization, and he's been able to take us on a slightly different path. So we've had that initial setup that was excellent, and now we've got Andy taking us on a different route. Same thing with our patron. So last year with the coronation of King Charles, the Duke of Gloucester, who was our previous patron, was given elevated roles, and he could no longer be patron for so many different societies. So the Duke of Gloucester announced that he was leaving. We kind of thought through, who can we get as another patron? And we thought, well, let's get someone who's really good at science communication, has an interest in the environment, and will be a great voice for us. So the first name that came up was Kate Humble. I saw the name come up and thought, well, let's try it, but we'll see what happens. And she said yes. So we ended up going from one great patron to another great patron. My other challenge, I guess, was the journals that we have. So European Journals of Soil Science and Soil Use and Management. Both of them had editors that had come to the end of their term. They were both great editors. And we're quite worried about how we're going to fill those shoes. So on both journals, we're quite lucky. We got Leo Condren from New Zealand, who's actually originally from Glasgow. He is now leading Soil Use and Management as its editor. And then for European Journal of Soil Science, we got another exceptionally good scientist, Roland Ball, who's leading that one. So both the journals, we had that bit of a challenge, but it worked out quite well as well. So, and all of those challenges, I guess, turned into highlights eventually. For soil science, I guess the biggest challenge for us at the moment is the funding crisis, which is facing both universities and research institutes. If you look at either, the numbers of staff are declining, the resources are also declining. Their universities are consolidating a lot of their teaching. If you've got courses that don't have many students on them, which soil science often falls into, it's at risk. So at the beginning, you mentioned that I was tutor for the MSc Soil Science at Aberdeen. That course is currently on pause. This is against the sector, which is completely different. So if you go on to LinkedIn and you look at jobs for soil specialist, you will find hundreds of jobs advertised. And it's developed into quite a broad profession. And I think what's happened is there were soil scientists within these consulting companies. They've demonstrated the value of soil, the importance of it for decisions, for construction, for land use, for agriculture, and whatever else. And this whole sector has been growing. And what I hear from these people is they find it quite hard to fill their positions. So we've got not a lot of people enrolling in soil science, but we've got a big demand for soil scientists. And when these companies are trying to appoint people, sometimes they've got some of the skills, but not all of the skills that they need. And that's another thing we need to think of as a society to make sure that the discipline is delivered in its highest caliber possible.
And tell us a bit about your hopes for the next part of your presidency.
So I've got about 9 months left, I think, until the end of this part of my presidency. That won't be the end of me. I will still be there as past president, and I'll still see some of the projects hopefully reach completion. What we're doing this year is a State of Soil Science report. This is really to just gather information. We need this information for, first of all, effective lobbying. but we also need it to work out what do we need to have on our website? What do we need in terms of training of the next generation? And where do our members sit? And what are the actual trajectories? There's lots of things that we think are happening, such as declines in funding or whatever else, but we don't have those figures. So with this report, we're going to look at what is the demand for soil scientists, what is the current investment in soil science, and what is the need of the next generation of soil scientists as well. To deliver that, because I kind of know this from my university job, will be this education subgroup. So that's being set up at the moment. A few people may get emails in their inbox quite soon. Through this, we want to get better partnerships between post-secondary institutions, but also within that, make it easier for institutions that may teach a little bit of soil science to teach really high quality of soil science. Because that way, we attract people into the discipline. They may stay in it, go on to further study at postgraduate level, and then we've developed more and more effective soil scientists, or if they're working on the peripheries of soil science, at least that grounding they have will be high caliber as well. Something else that we're working on is to have increased international reach. That's to benefit soil scientists globally. So we're quite lucky as a society that we have a lot of corporate members, other ways that income gets generated. So we've got this great exec team and an ability to deliver a lot of different activities. And we also were quite lucky as a society that we have a lot of members who have trained in the UK, but they're international. So they often will go home after they finish their master's or PhD study in the UK and continue doing work there. So we want to make sure that we keep connected with those people as well.
Okay, thank you. Now, you've already made a commitment to a high level of engagement with society members. Are there any particular changes that they should be looking out for over the next year?
So I think people hopefully will continue to see us at meetings. Those meetings do pay off. As I've mentioned, they're not just us going around and attending different events around the world. I can remember at Eurosoil, we had our booth set up and someone came up and just said to us, "Boy, you guys are everywhere." And, it's got benefits. It attracts new members. It attracts corporate members and sponsors to us as well. And it also lets us stay connected with a lot of the societies around the world. So we'll be at the World Congress of Soil Science, for instance, in Nanjing in June, and hopefully keeping up a lot of those connections. What I'm hoping we can see is greater involvement of a lot of the members in our activities. I think we could draw on them a lot more, just so that the society offers more in terms of attracting people to soil science, training that next generation, and also working on advocacy so that we make sure that soils are protected into the future. Examples of that are both the policy and education subgroups that I've mentioned previously, which really draw directly on our members' expertise, so that a lot of our activities are driven upwards from the membership.
Tell us a bit about your current international work.
Yeah, sure. So anyone who's been listening to the podcasts will have heard a podcast a few episodes ago. It featured Dr. Audamogus, who's from Hawassa University in Ethiopia. And he's been a collaborator for about the past 10 years. And Auda does work really at the interface with farmers within Ethiopia, looking at sustainable practices. And we've had a number of projects with Hawassa University, Central Ethiopian Agricultural Research Institute, and International Water Management Institute in Ethiopia, looking at soil degradation, ways that we can improve soil, either by improving the amounts of carbon in the soils, using vegetation, changing farming practices, and within a broader team that includes social scientists and economists, looking at how that can benefit farmers. So a lot of the activities are very much working directly with farming communities. It's giving them new ways to generate income. But at the same time, the work I'm involved in is seeing whether or not there are positive benefits to the soil. So what are some of the positive impacts in terms of stabilization against soil erosion? How can we What practices can we use to prevent soil erosion? Are we drawing on biodiversity, for instance, enough as a way to protect land within these regions? And that's incredibly rewarding because it's a link where we're learning a huge amount from the Ethiopian partners. It's got direct impact on the ground that you can see. These are subsistence farmers who benefit considerably from some of the practices that we're working on with them. And you can really see your research making a difference within this. The other area I've had a lot of international work with is in China. And that actually started off from previous links that I had with institutions in Europe. And I met a Chinese scientist there back in the late 1990s. We set up a link in the early 2000s. So it's really when Chinese soil science was in its ascendancy. So I went over there. They had fairly basic labs. Facilities weren't great. I go over there now. They've got the best labs in the world. And thousands of people working on soil science. I mean, I think the Chinese Society of Soil Science has several thousand members, as opposed to our 1,000 members. So the first collaborator I had there was someone called Professor Bin Zhang, and we had a lot of collaborative research projects that were quite small kind of travel grants. And then eventually we set up an EU-funded training workshop in China where we're focusing on this link between biological and physical properties in soil that I mentioned earlier. So this topic of soil biophysics. And when I go back to China now, I can see the impact from that. There are a lot of people there who are working in this kind of area, trying to find these bridges. It's not only biology and physics, there's a lot of other areas within soil science that have now been brought into it as well.
Okay, Paul, you've talked about China. Tell us about one of the most important networks that you were involved in.
So about 2015, there was a large initiative set up by the Natural Environment Research Council in the UK and the National Science Foundation in China called the Critical Zone Observatory Network. So this set up a range of critical zone observatories across China. And you may ask yourself, what is a critical zone observatory? So these are very highly instrumented field sites. You monitor everything from the atmosphere above, through the trees or vegetation, down through the soil, and down to the bottom of the groundwater beneath that. So it's a link between geology, hydrogeology, soil science, experts in vegetation and ecology, and atmospheric sciences as well. So 5 of these networks were set up around China. I was the UK lead for one of them that was located in South China. It's called the Red Soil Observatory. I think you'll be talking to someone else who led the peri-urban project. So that was Professor Yong, who is looking at how in peri-urban environments, practices like recycling waste affected soil properties. In my area, it was subtropical. We're looking at highly weathered soils. How are things like fertilization increasing the weathering rates of those soils? And how is that affecting their longer-term sustainability? Anyway, all these projects work together incredibly well. I think the outputs from them were absolutely remarkable. And they came at that time when China was really on that ascendancy. So we learned a lot as UK scientists. I think it would have been good if we could have set up some of these critical zone observatories in the UK as well. We brought some expertise over to China as well, particularly in areas of soil monitoring and using advanced techniques like geophysics. We also brought over some modeling techniques. And another big outcome, I think, was that we introduced social sciences to these critical zone observatories. So we're looking at the impacts between what was being done on the land, how it affected the wider environment, and then how that interacted with the people who were involved on those sites as well.
Really, my last question is about the future of the profession and the way it's taught. And what I'd like to ask you is, how would you like the teaching of soil science to develop over the next 10 years?
So I think I mentioned earlier on that when I was in my first year at university, soil science didn't captivate me. And I think it was because it was a lot of pictures showing soil that I didn't really connect with. I didn't know why they looked so different. And it was a lot of naming of soils. I think soil science teaching has changed since then. There's a lot more on why soils are important, what they do, how they can be managed. And then later on, those topics on soil formation and soil classification get taught because they are also incredibly important to learn, just a bit difficult to grasp from the outset. What I can say is that we're at a difficult time right now, as I mentioned, because there is that funding crisis in UK education institutions. I also said that the student numbers don't match the industry need, and they certainly don't face the challenge, or they don't match the numbers that are needed to kind of address some of the challenges that face humanity at the moment. So I'm hoping that we can retain core soil science teaching because it is a complex subject, and we do need people who've really got this holistic understanding that gives them that expertise in the physics, the chemistry, the biology, the classification of soils, so that we can get really, really in-depth, thorough answers as well. But that said, soil science is quite prominent now across a huge range of degree programs. We have to stop just thinking about the soil science course. It's probably not going to attract all the numbers that we need. So we need to work out ways that we can reach those students with the best quality teaching too. So they may be taught by lecturers who aren't soil specialists. So what material could they access to make something that's much more compelling that's delivered? There's opportunities in digital teaching that already exists if you look online. There's also a realization that a lot of people go into work, they might go into an environmental consultancy or sustainability within a corporation or whatever, and soils will become a big part of their job. And this is where we need to focus on in-work training. So we need to look at, how can we serve these professionals? So we have working with soil courses offered through the British Society of Soil Science. These are continually being grown upon, and they're not there to displace further in higher education institutions. They're there to teach quite niche subjects that often you can't access through them. They also provide a really good level of practical training. And again, they're taught by soil surveyors, people who've got a lot of on-the-ground experience. And often those people, you don't have that expertise within a higher education institution. So we're trying to use some of our courses in tandem with some education providers as a way to offer postgraduate certificates or whatever else. So that's really the kind of BS cubed approach towards education. That's, make it more accessible, use some new techniques, make sure that we can train people when they're out in the workplace. As an academic, I'm hoping that we can retain core soil science teaching. I think we need to work on ways to attract students into the discipline. And I'm hoping that universities don't all turn into the same beige institute. And instead, we've got a few institutions that offer quite specialist degrees. You've heard stories that more people are studying agriculture now as a consequence of Clarkson's Farm. So hopefully that's true. And hopefully we end up getting more people interested in soil science.
Paul, thank you very much for your time. Massively fascinating analysis of the work that you have been doing and that you're planning to do over the next year. And my very best wishes for the next half of your presidency. I'm now delighted to welcome Adam Burton, who is a student of Paul's at the University of Aberdeen. Adam, welcome. Adam was born in Newcastle upon Tyne, where he shortly moved home to his family's third-generation arable and cattle ranching farm in central Zambia. Throughout his rural upbringing, Adam developed an interest in arable agriculture, and he began moving away from ranching operations. His interest in modern agriculture molded his interest in soils and plants and began to identify the negative environmental impacts that a fully synthetic approach of raising plants was having on the microbial communities in the soil. Adam, welcome to Soil Matters. I'm going to ask you a few questions about yourself, if I can. You're currently in the third year of a 4-year course. Tell us what prompted you to choose plant and soil science.
Hi, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very delighted to be here and very delighted to be around so many like-minded professionals. So what exactly kind of made me want to do plant soil science in my third year at Aberdeen? Well, I think it's quite simple. Whenever I was thinking about where I'm going to go to university, I always knew I was going to go to the UK eventually. What exactly, I wasn't too sure yet, but I knew something to do with agriculture. So I really had like a really, serious sit-down conversation with my father and kind of discussed what is the future plans for the farm. And obviously, my dad obviously is very used to the usual synthetic approach, so applying a lot of NPKs. Some fields were doing over 500 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Which, whenever I'm in the bike and I'm spreading it, I feel like there's a big problem here. I think we're putting way too much synthetic. So I kind of wanted something a bit more difficult and something a bit more challenging. So I think when it came to deciding on my degree, the BSc Plant Soil Science degree at Aberdeen was a bit more technical, a bit more challenging. Also, just looking at the complexity of the degree and the overview really made the decision quite simple. And I think once I leave, I should hopefully have some skills that maybe my dad doesn't have and the knowledge my dad doesn't have because it's a bit more technical than my father's. So that's kind of the plan. So hopefully I can bring something back to the farm and benefit the operation back home as well.
Just tell me, for my benefit, what's your definition of a synthetic approach?
So for my definition, a synthetic approach is one that maximizes synthetic things like herbicides, pesticides, a lot of chemical application, a lot of synthetic nitrogen application, phosphorus application, and really kind of just discriminating the ability of the soil to feed the plant by itself independently, as opposed to needing all of these synthetic approaches, with added like lots of urea, a lot of top dressing, Roundup, and all these various herbicides and pesticides, which are actually really harmful to the soils as well, is kind of my definition of quite synthetic.
Okay. And tell us, were there any influences when you were growing up that led you specifically to focus on soil science?
Yes, I mean, definitely. Fortunately enough, whenever I finished my high school in South Africa, we finished in December, and all of the universities in the UK, they all start September. So I had quite a long break there to really focus on the farm and just be on the farm for a long extended period of time where I can focus on actually raising plants and really kind of trying to define myself and trying to find whether or not I really want to go into farming. So I spent that whole 8-month break really farming, heavily involved in all the operations. I kind of felt as soon as we would go planting would be fine. Although a lot of the soil had no organic matter. Little did I know, obviously I didn't know that at the time, but very dry soil, nothing really going on. And I'm there in the Vicon spreading urea and NPKs. And we're spending so much. I mean, 500 kilos a hectare on potatoes is, it's just extreme. I think it's just too much. And I think when I'm looking at it all being spread out, there's got to be a problem here. I mean, there's got to be a more healthy way of doing this. And I think that's kind of why Aberdeen was a simple choice. I knew there had to be a way, around this, and a way that's more healthy for the soil, not only the farmer whilst maintaining profits and yield, but also for the end consumer. There's no way that these synthetic approaches can really be healthy for the consumer as well. So I think that 9 month break really molded me probably more than that whole time I'd been on the farm, because I was really, really involved in the practices. And just being able to look at the soil and actually just feel it and just know that there's just something not right here. There's something we're doing here that's not as beneficial and not as efficient as it could be. And we also have very sandy soils. So just watching the water drain, I'm like, there's got to be something going on here. There must be a remedy. There has to be something that we can do to make this more healthy. And that's kind of why I ended up doing this. Yeah.
And now, as I've said, you've been at the university for 3 years. Tell us about how your thinking about the subject has developed over that 3-year period.
So I would say first and second year weren't really too in depth. We kind of went over a little bit of soil science, a little bit of nutrient cycling. But I think the third year, and as soon as I started getting involved with Paul Hallett's modules, I think I really saw kind of the career path I really want to take. And it really just advanced my understanding of soils and just what exactly is a soil and what are the factors that really improve soils, what makes them more healthy. What does aggregation mean? What is the negatives of tilling? What are all these practices that we kept doing on our farm, and realizing, honestly, these aren't actually ideal. These are not the most efficient. These are not healthy for our soils. Why have we got such poor water use efficiency? What are we doing here? And I think as soon as I've had 3 or 4 lectures of Paul's, and they've all been exceptionally interesting to me. And I mean, probably the most stimulating lectures I've had. I think that's just because I'm so interested in it. And I think going from first year to third year, my knowledge of soil science and just plant science as a whole has become astronomically different from first year. To be fair, looking back on it, in all honesty, I knew nothing about soils. And I'm very fortunate to be in the position now in third year that I am with the knowledge I have, thanks to Paul and just the Aberdeen course as a whole.
And let me ask you, you've touched on careers. Where do you think the course will take you over the next 3 or 4 years once you've graduated?
I think careers is something I'm still a little bit struggling with. I think I'm kind of getting pulled in almost 3 directions because I know as myself, I'm not really much of an academic. So I don't really see myself pursuing a master's or a PhD necessarily. I think agriculture at the moment is my primary focus. And perhaps agronomy might be interesting with a more, going in agronomy with more of a regenerative approach and a more healthy soil, more healthy, microbial community soil, and just, improving root architecture to improve yield, as opposed to, using these new genetic seeds, which obviously they produce really well, but they do require a lot of synthetic application. And then again, I'm also kind of a bit torn between maybe perhaps environmental consultancy and even government work. And obviously with climate change, soil carbon sequestration is also something I'm very interested in as well. Especially now, I mean, we're burning more fossil fuels than we've ever burned before. So I think it's something that I'm very interested in going into as well. It kind of just depends. I think I perhaps want to do an internship with some sort of consultancy agency, or I might, if I'm really enjoying my summer work this summer, I'm working for a potato breeding company out in Milnathort in Scotland. And if that goes really well, I think that'll kind of also again solidify my position in agriculture. And I think that's definitely something I want to continue to pursue. So at the moment, I'm pretty stellar agriculture, but there's definitely a few outlets as well I'm looking into as well. So not closing off any doors just yet.
Let me ask you a completely unfair question. How do you think the world of soil science will be changing over the next 10 years?
I think I'm looking at it with more of an optimistic point of view. I think soil science at the moment is something that kind of, in all truth, gets brushed off by a lot of people. I mean, a lot of my student colleagues, they don't really understand it, and I don't think they value the importance of it. But I think within the coming years, even within the next 3 years, I think there'll be a large importance being placed on soil science. And just people, I think, will appreciate it more and give it more value, because I think without soils, what is the world without soils? Soils are the basis of everything we do, the foundation we build on, the foundation of all food, and without them, we won't be able to sequester any carbon. So I think definitely soils are going to get a lot more praise for their importance and their value, and I'm very excited to see that because I think it is very valuable to note.
You've touched on something very interesting about obviously the essential nature of soils and the relationship with food production. Just in terms of your work and your previous work back home, what level of awareness do you think there is of the relationship between soil and food production?
Definitely back home, I think there's no real true understanding of what the importance of soils, and I think a lot of the importance of farming is entirely on applications of herbicides and pesticides. It's almost a bit backwards, but I think Europe and America, they're kind of starting to see the light, and I see a lot more regenerative practices in practice. And I think a lot of people are looking for ways to, in like intercropping as well, just strategies in improving the actual soil health in order to maintain these yields. But I think Zambia and perhaps even Africa as a whole maybe just a little bit behind at the moment, and I think that's something I'm interested in bringing back to Zambia, and just to make people more aware of the actual value that soil places on our food production. And obviously without it we wouldn't be able to attain any yields that we do now. So I think it's very interesting to note that soils, obviously, with their great importance, it is very important that we make everyone aware of this. I mean, Zambia is full of lots of small-scale subsistence farmers, and a lot of them aren't really have access to these synthetic approaches, so they also would also benefit from having this knowledge as well. So I'm very excited to see how that will improve agriculture back home in Zambia and Africa as a whole. And I really hope that, as Europe and America progresses and gains a better understanding of the importance of soils, I hope Africa follows as well.
You've reminded me, about 6 months ago on one of these podcasts, we had a discussion about the use of the phrase soil health, and about whether you could apply that phrase to soil in the way that you might to a human being. So tell me about your thoughts on how useful the notion of soil health is in doing your studies.
I think soil health is arguably one of the most vital aspects of my studies, and I think you're very right. I think being able to attain soil health and human health is very similar. I mean, soils cycle nutrients the same way humans cycle nutrients within their bodies, and they're able to develop and grow. And without good micronutrients, a human won't be able to excel the way it does. As the way, if a human is only eating macronutrients such as like carbohydrates, it will not perform the same without these micronutrients. And I think that goes the same for soils. These macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium. I think this is kind of these are the nutrients that are really overly important, very very important. And I think they are obviously key to plant growth. But I think a lot of these small ones, copper, zinc, boron, they often kind of get brushed aside. But I think that their value should be very very noticed, because I mean, without them, the plant won't be able to attain the same yields that they do. And I think that's another thing that's, if I can touch on, with pH and phytoavailability. I think these are some of the processes people don't really understand entirely, especially in the farming community. So I think being able to work on the soil pH and be able to make the soil more dynamic, so that even though it has these nutrients available, it needs to be able to actually make them available to the plant and make them inorganic for the plant to be able to take up. So I think the same way micronutrients are sometimes kind of brushed aside in human health, I think the same way they need to be applied to soil health, and they need to be have more importance to them as well. So I think that's a very good notion to say that soil health is very important as well.
And let me ask you a question about the difference in attitudes between the farming community and more urban communities. Do you think there's a different level of understanding of the issues of soil health generally and what soil science is about generally?
I think definitely. I mean, almost 100%. I think a lot of the urban community, they don't really understand. But I mean, you can't even blame them. I mean, as someone that's obviously in an urban environment at the moment while I'm studying, I don't really see necessarily like the value of soil, because I don't see it every day. Whereas individuals in the rural areas and farmers and people that really rely on these soils, some farmers, at least back home even, some farms stretch over 5,000 hectares. I mean, the soil is so important, and I think being able to own all this land and be able to see what the soil gives back to it, I think is very vital. And without good soil, you won't have good vegetation. Without good vegetation, you won't be able to rear animals. You won't be able to plant crops. And I think that's very different to having these techno soils we built now in these rural areas. They don't really add much value to someone from a rural area, so they're kind of just seen as just dirt, I suppose, which is really kind of a more uneducated point of view. Whereas these rural members, they really understand and value the importance of soil, because their livelihood depends on it.
And let me close with a question about communications. I'm very interested to know, if you cast your mind forward 10 years from now, if we could have very, very good soil communications, what do you think some of those key communications would be?
I think it's obviously, I must agree. I think within the next 10 years, I think communications definitely need to improve. I think people in the rural areas need to obviously understand more about why soils are so important to their systems, and just kind of understand that soil is not just dirt. I think that's often just something that's misdescribed. I mean, speaking to some of my colleagues here, and it's just like, oh, it's just dirt. It's all the same. But it's really not uniform. Every soil is different. Some more salty, some more clay, different aggregations. Everything is different. Soils cannot be treated the same, all of them, which I think is also very interesting in communicating when we're discussing with other professionals in the industry. Everyone might have a different point of view, because everyone's experienced different types of soil. So like I said, back home, we have very, very sandy soils. So I think for us to communicate with someone with very clay soils is very difficult to communicate. But I think within the next 10 years, I think people will obviously see the true value of soil and be able to communicate it better, and just hopefully help each other and understand soils better, so that everyone can help each other and non-dependent on what type of soil it is. And I must admit, I'm very, very excited, especially because this is something I'm very passionate about, looking into the next 10 years. And obviously, when I will hopefully be a professional by that point, and just being able to improve just growing conditions and improve soil health, make these microbial communities better, and prevent these synthetic operations, and just communicate that with everyone, and just really help just identify the real significance that soil has in plant growth. But yeah, I think communications with that is very vital. And I think within the next 10 years, I think we'll definitely get to a point where it's well communicated both with rural members and urban members. And I'm very excited to see that, and hopefully see that soil, as might be called dirt, really gets the appreciation it really deserves, because I think it is such a vital element in the world, and without it, I really think we would struggle. So I'm very, very excited for the next 10 years, and I'm hoping with an optimistic point of view that everyone will share my view and hope for a healthier, more beneficial soil.
Brilliant. Adam, thank you very much for your time and your enthusiasm. And that, in terms of communication, that really couldn't be better. Much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Yong, the Director General of the Institute of Urban Environment at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He's been working on the biogeochemistry of nutrients, metals, and also of emerging pollutants. Before returning to China in 2002, he worked as a research fellow at the Queen's University of Belfast, as a postdoctoral fellow in the University of Adelaide, Australia, and he obtained his PhD in environmental biology from Imperial College London in 1998. Yong has had an impressive career. He is an academician of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which is the highest academic accolade in China. He has also written extensively, around 1,000 scientific publications. Can I offer you a warm welcome to the podcast? Earlier on this podcast, I was chatting to Professor Paul Hallett, the president of the British Society of Soil Science, and he mentioned his research links in China and also meeting with you many years ago when you were in Adelaide in Australia. Tell us a little bit about how soil science, both academically and professionally, has changed over the past 30 years.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you. Soil science is a very important subject, not only for scientists, but more for the societal development. As you know, China has limited land, and we have to produce food for the large population. And the soil is the critical foundation for food security. So how to improve the soil fertility and maintain the health of the soil so that we will produce enough nutritious, safe food for our nation. So soil science has that big role. And over the past 20 years or so, I think maybe 30 years, soil science research in China has becoming increasingly more international. So we have lots of international projects, exchange of scientists, and also exchange of young, scholars like students, PhD students, etc. So this international collaboration really is critical in building up our capacity and also to exchange ideas, experiences in addressing some of these common global challenges for food security and environmental sustainability. So this is what I believe that soil science has been developing very fast in China. And this aligns very well with the national needs, but also with the international community. The collaboration has been critical.
And tell me, outside of the world of research, where do people who studied soil science generally work in China?
You mean those who have been outside of China, where do they study?
No, just in terms of people who've started their careers academically but have moved maybe into a non-academic field of work. What are the best opportunities, would you say?
I'm not obsessed with the soil science discipline because I'm a soil scientist. But I do believe with the training of soil science, we have many opportunities of working in different fields. For example, soil science traditionally is for agriculture science, but our training spans from chemistry, geology, biology, so we can work in, for example, environmental science, in the chemical industry, or material science, because we do study minerals in the soil. So And or in biology, we study a lot plant science, microbiology. So it's not so difficult if you decided to move to biology. Look at the microbiology, botany, or other biological sciences. So I would say, being trained as a soil scientist, we have broader perspectives in working in other areas, not just in the academia, but also industry. So I'm very much I like my discipline naturally.
Absolutely. No, I could tell. That's fabulous. Now, when I was talking to Professor Hallett, he mentioned that you had been working as a researcher on the joint China-UK Critical Zone Observatory project. Could you tell us a little about this project, please?
Yes. So critical zone is pretty much the life supporting component of the Earth system. So it starts from the top of the vegetation, the canopy, to the bedrock, that the soil, some groundwater, and the plant. This is the life supporting system for the Earth. And traditionally, this system, we call it a Earth surface system. Usually, we study them in isolation: water cycle, soil, vegetation. But the critical zone science is really a systems approach, because in this entire critical zone, each component is connected with others, and there are cascading effects. So something like that. So it's really a systems approach to understand the dynamics of biogeochemical cycling. For example, the movement of nutrients, the contaminants between the groundwater to the soil to the plant, and finally may affect our food safety, because the food we are eating, more or less maybe 80-90% finally all from soil, directly or indirectly. So I think this is a systems approach that the critical zone science is good at, I think.
Okay. And tell us a bit about your perspective on international links. Clearly, you've worked in many different places around the world, but focusing on the mutual benefits to soil science, in particular, perhaps talk about the collaborations that you've been involved in between the UK and China.
So I have been collaborating with UK scientists now over 30 years from my first visit to the United Kingdom in 1994. And I think that international collaboration is particularly important for young scientists. I still believe my initial experience as a young scholar in the United Kingdom, I learned not just the science, but the culture, the history, and know the people, so that I can establish a network of collaborators at my earlier career stage. And this network are still growing, and I'm still interacting with those scientists I met 30 years ago. So this is really a lifelong friendship. And on top of this friendship, we can really collaborate effectively and fruitfully. Without this friendship, collaboration is only for the sake of collaboration. So what I mean is, with this friendship, it's really a pleasure in working together. And to address these global challenges, and we share experience, we share knowledge, we share ideas. And now, after these 30 years, I feel it is now my responsibility to promote international collaboration for future generations of scientists from our two countries. They can become friends at their young, earlier career stage and continue the journey. And I believe the soil science collaboration between our two countries may be dated back many decades, and we all enjoy that friendship.
Brilliant. Thank you. Now, I want to ask you about your work on the peri-urban environment. A lot of your work has been focused on that. Could you define the phrase and could you talk about the key issues here, please?
Yeah, I think the peri-urban environment is really the interface between rural and the urban environment. And globally now, more than 50% of the population lives in cities. So within the city, there's a high population density. And we consume energies, we consume food. So there is discharge of waste material into the surrounding in the city surrounding the city, and the peri-urban environment is really providing the food to the cities. So there is a very intense cycling of nutrients through food, through water, and also through air. And the quality of or the health of the people in the cities depends on the ecosystem services of the peri-urban environment, because they are all connected. They are not in isolation. So the peri-urban environment, in a way, can assimilate the waste stream from the cities. For example, the nutrients from the cities can be recycled back to the peri-urban environment for food production, because the nutrients is a resource we must capture and reuse and recycle. So I think this peri-urban ecosystem is really the hotspot for human-nature interactions.
Do you think that if you look back over your period, say when studying in London and to the present day, do you think there is a growing understanding of the impact of soil science, the value of soil science more generally?
I wouldn't say there is a growing recognition of the importance of soil. It has always been considered as important. But I would say more in recent decades, I think people realize that the soil is not just for food production, because soil science usually is considered as part of agriculture science. But now, because of the multifunctionality of soil, it's not just for food, it's for the environmental quality, it is for the climate change, because soil can store carbon, it can remove carbon dioxide from the air. So in a way that mitigates greenhouse gas emission. So if we can manage the soil resources sustainably, it will benefit for food production, environmental safety, and climate stability.
I'm interested in your comments about the peri-urban. Do you think enough work is done on soil in the entirely urban environment?
Well, I think there is more we need more research on the urban soil, because people normally think, oh, in the cities we don't see many soils. We have concrete buildings, we have pavements, road infrastructure, etc. But I think that the soil is critical in urban health and well-being, because in a healthy city, we must maintain green space for biodiversity, for human health. And the green space needs soil to support the plant growth. And the plant diversity will support the animal diversity, the butterflies, the bees, the birds, etc. All this biodiversity above ground we see depends on the soil, and the soil biodiversity in particular. So we are very much focusing on the ecological functions of the soil in the cities, how the soil will affect human health, and how can we improve human health through the soil health management. So I really think soil in the cities are very important. It has been neglected, overlooked, I would say, in the past.
Okay. And you also work in the area of recycling fertilizer. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah. So in this case, particularly, I would take phosphorus as an example because phosphorus is a limited natural resource. If we can't recycle, we will end up with really a crisis of phosphorus supply. And without sufficient phosphorus supply to the soil, we cannot sustain food production. So for sustainable food production, we must keep the loop close. Try to recycle as much as possible of the nutrients in this socio-ecological system. We call it socio-ecological system because human is a big part of this system. One of the dominant species that drive this biogeochemical cycling capture these nutrients as resources for food production. And otherwise, it becomes the source of pollution. If we don't recycle them, either phosphorus or nitrogen, they become source of pollution, which will lead to the deterioration of aquatic ecosystem, such as toxic algae blooming. And again, that will affect the water quality and eventually affect the human health. So that is also the philosophy of critical zone science. We must consider all the parts together, not just study one part in isolation. Everything is connected. We must take a systems view to the entire critical zone.
Okay, now I want to talk briefly about the World Conference, which is taking place in Nanjing this June. I know that you're one of the keynote speakers. Tell us about your plans for that conference. What should viewers and attendees be looking forward to?
Yeah, first of all, this is the first time over the last 100 years of this International Union of Soil Science. This Congress is going to be hosted by China. So we feel it's a privilege, it's a responsibility, it's an honor, and this Chinese soil science community is working very hard to make sure the Congress a big success, scientifically and also culturally. So this Chinese people are always very generous, and we are very friendly. So we welcome all participants from all parts of the world, and I look forward to meeting new and old friends at this Congress. And myself, I will talk about the soil microbiome and the role of soil microbiome in maintaining the ecosystem services, etc. Yeah.
Brilliant. And anything else that we should look for? Because I'm going to be speaking to your colleague, Professor Song Xin, who's I think very involved in the organisation of the conference. Anything else that we should be looking forward to in that conference that you'd like to highlight?
I don't think any specific points. Other than that, I think Nanjing is a very ancient historical capital and lots of attractions, natural attractions, and also historical sites. So I would suggest the participants should have, 1, 2, or 3 days in free to see the city. Particularly our international participants come all the way, and they should use this opportunity to see the city, to join the field excursion, to feel the culture, to understand, to enjoy the cultural diversity and the landscape diversity in Nanjing and in other parts of China.
Brilliant. Well, that seems to be a brilliant promotion for this really important event. Thank you very, very much indeed for your time. Thank you. Professor Song Xin is from the Institute of Soil Science in Nanjing, which is hosting this year's World Congress. She conducts research on the fate of contaminants in soil, and as a previous employer Arcadis, who are one of the corporate members of the British Society of Soil Science. Occurrence, fate, and transport of emerging contaminants are some of the substances which form a part of the professor's work. You also look at remediation strategies for soil and groundwater contamination, and most importantly, we're coming up to the launch of the conference later this year, and that's one of the subjects we're very keen to talk about. So my first question is, this is a hugely important congress. Can you tell us about its role in soil science research and practice?
Sure, of course. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for having me, Paul. So this year for the 23rd World Congress of Soil Science, it is truly a cornerstone event for our global soil science community, especially as we are hosting it here in Nanjing, China, through the Institute of Soil Science, which is my institute. So its core role is to bridge the gap between cutting-edge research and the real-world practice. Of course, soil is the foundation of food security, environmental health, and even the climate change. So this Congress will bring together thousands of researchers. Actually, we are looking at probably 4,000 scientists, practitioners, policymakers, and industry experts. They are from over 100 countries. We will share the latest findings, exchange ideas, and translate scientific discoveries into actionable solutions. So I think for this Congress, for researchers, it's a platform to showcase their breakthroughs in research, like the new ways to understand the soil contaminants or to restore soil degradation. And for a lot of practitioners, it's an opportunity to learn from global best practices, whether it's the sustainable farming techniques or contamination remediation or even soil carbon sequestration. Essentially, I think this Congress will be where science meets action, ensuring that our work on soil does not just stay in the labs. They will make a tangible difference for people and for the planet.
Let me just ask you to summarize the key themes for this year.
Well, the theme for the Congress in 2026 is soil and the shared future for humanity. For this year's Congress, I think we built around this theme and addressed the most pressing soil challenges of our time. These are all aligned with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. These top things include, first of all, of course, soil health and food security. As the global population grows, we need to protect soil fertility while reducing environmental impact. The second important theme would be soil and climate change. Soil is a massive carbon sink. So we are discussing how to enhance soil carbon sequestration to mitigate climate change. In addition, we adapt to climate impacts like droughts and floods that harm soil health. And thirdly, I think one of the key things is the innovative remediation and restoration, finding cost-effective and eco-friendly ways to clean up contaminated soil and restore degraded lands. For example, the emerging contaminants in soil and groundwater, which is very close to my own work, focusing on substances like PFAS, which are very persistent and harmful. Of course, during this Congress, we also have themes around digital soil science, soil biodiversity, and sustainable soil management. So those are, some of the key themes for this Congress.
And you've touched on this already, but what would you say is the value of international collaboration on these topics?
Of course, soil international collaboration is absolutely critical. especially in today's global context. Soil issues do not respect borders. One contaminant released in one country, it can seep into groundwater and affect neighboring regions. Another aspect, climate change impacts soil health globally, from drought in Africa to flooding in Asia. By collaborating internationally, we can share data, expertise, and technologies that no single country or institution could develop alone. For example, in my work on PFAS, we have collaborated with researchers from Europe, North America, Australia. Each region, they have their different PFAS usage patterns. Of course, they have their own soil types. So we pull our data together will help us understand how these contaminants behave across different environments. In addition, collaboration also helps us avoid reinventing the wheels. A remediation strategy that works in Europe might be adapted for use in China with the adjustment for local soil conditions. This is the value of the collaboration. Additionally, this international collaboration builds capacity, especially for early career researchers and scientists in developing countries who can learn from more experienced teams and bring that knowledge back to their own community. I think for a lot of the Chinese scientists and young scientists, this is a very valuable experience gained from international collaboration. And ultimately, soil science, in my own understanding, it is a global endeavor. We all rely on healthy soils, so we need to work together to protect it.
And tell me a couple of obviously you'll have many speakers, but list a couple of the keynote speakers, please.
Sure. Actually, we are really honored to have a really diverse lineup of world-renowned keynote speakers. I could give a few examples. One of the example is Professor Andy, who is from Nigeria. Actually, her talk is titled Soil Wealth to Global Security, Harnessing Regenerative Agriculture and the Soil's Multifunctional Role for Climate and Environmental Resilience. She represents a very diverse researchers from Africa. Actually, we also have Professor Peter Smith from the UK. He will share his thoughts on the looking after soils so that they could look after Earth, which is going to be a timely reminder of our interdependence with the soil. We also have a Professor Panos from Europe, Professor Deli Chen from Australia, Professor Joanne Velen from Canada, and in addition, from China, we are pleased to have a Professor Yong Guan. I believe you will talk to him. And proudly, our professor, the director from my own institute, Professor Renfeng Shen, the Institute of Soil Science, who will present on the sustainable utilization of acid soil, Chinese innovations and field practices, offering insights for global prospects. So this diverse group will ensure that our keynote sessions cover very broad topics and from a global perspective. I think this will set the stage for meaningful discussion on the most pressing soil challenges of our time.
What one thing, if you could choose, what one thing would you most like to achieve this year at the conference?
Well, of course, we have many objectives in mind, but the three core goals, I think, would be fostering global scientific exchange, which we discussed earlier, advancing the cutting-edge soil science research, and promoting sustainable soil management practices worldwide. The heart of this congress we aim to bring together international experts, early career scientists, and policymakers, hopefully to create a unified space to tackle these soil-related challenges of our time. These can include soil degradation, food security, climate change, and also biodiversity.
I want to ask you a couple of questions about your own work specifically. You focus as a researcher on soil contaminants. Tell us a bit more about your day-to-day research.
Actually, these days, one of my research centers on the occurrence you mentioned earlier, occurrence, fate, and transport of emerging contaminants in soil and groundwater. One of the primary or group of primary contaminants are PFAS. You probably heard of this. They are often called forever chemicals due to their extreme persistence. So my group investigates how PFAS enter soils and groundwater, how they move through different soil types, and how they accumulate or transform over time in different environment media, of course, including soils. Our daily research activities include we would go do field sampling across contaminated sites, experiment in the lab to understand the different processes which are affecting PFAS in environmental media. So our work aims to identify these critical exposure pathways of PFAS, how they impact our human health or ecosystem. For human beings, these exposure pathways include food intakes and drinking water, these exposure pathways. So with this scientific evidence we generated in this process, we could inform the regulation and help with the safe management of the PFAS in general.
Okay, and you also focus on innovative remediation strategies in dealing with contamination. Tell me a bit about your work in this area.
So for the remediation of contaminants in soil and groundwater, our target is to develop sustainable, cost-effective, and low-carbon solutions for soil and groundwater pollution, especially those very hard-to-treat contaminants like PFAS. In general, my group explore in situ approaches because they prioritize the green technologies, which minimize disturbance and energy use. These remediation strategies in my group, they can include bioremediation, where we utilize the microbes to do the work to destroy contaminants. So an example of the application of the bioremediation is to treat chromium-6 in groundwater. I think some of our audience might have heard of chromium-6, which is carcinogen. I think in early 21st, there is a movie on the chromium-6, Aaron Brockridge. Which when I was working for Arcadis, actually, I work on the chromium-6 side at Hinckley, which is really important experience for myself. Another aspect we are working on is the green remediation design. We try to integrate life cycle assessment to ensure that the solutions we develop are environmentally sustainable, scalable, and feasible for field applications. Lastly, another area is to develop advanced materials for soil and groundwater remediation. One of the example is to develop nanomaterials. These for example, there are some minerals which can remove PFAS from drinking water, or to make them immobilize them in soil so that these compounds are not available for the uptake by the crops. So all these, I think we are supporting all these remediation technologies support the shift from a conventional, traditional high-impact and remediation technology to low-carbon circular approaches aligned with the global sustainability goals.
You've talked about forever chemicals, and my observation is that in England, there is a growing understanding of the dangers of forever chemicals. And my question is, to what extent in your day-to-day work are you increasingly seeing people understanding the importance of soil science?
Actually, to greater extent. So one of the research what we are doing right now is to look at the PFAS uptake by rice, which is a major staple food in China. This is, by the way, this is the research work at the very front of the soil science and new emerging contaminants relate to soil science and their occurrence in soil. So our research just found that the crops like rice, they could uptake PFAS and to a fairly great extent, and their concentration are exceeding the levels which were published by the European relevant agencies or by the in North America, in the United States. These are alarming scientific evidence when we talk to the local residents, talk to the farmers, talk to the policy regulators. So that you can see they have a huge impact. Another impact is we look at their occurrence in water, groundwater, drinking water sources. We see their broad detection at limits exceeding the U.S. regulation guideline number. You probably heard of it. PFAS has the most strict value of 4 nanogram per liter. So a lot of these water samples across different continents, in North America, Europe, China, Asia, all evidence show that a broad detection and occurrence of PFAS in different environmental media at alarming levels. There are different regulations across different areas. This is where we also call for the international collaboration we discussed earlier. And also what we have developed, what we have learned in this research, I think it could translate into our daily life, how to remove water from our from the tap water, how to prevent PFAS accumulation in the staple crops. And those are very relevant to soil science, very relevant to our daily life.
Thank you. And I want to ask you just about student life, because earlier in this podcast, we were discussing student life with Adam, who is in his 3rd year at Aberdeen University. And I just wonder what your thoughts are for the prospects for soil science students around the world over the next few years.
The prospects for soil science students, I actually think there are quite a few areas that they are becoming stronger and more diverse than ever. Actually, for this Congress, we'll have participants from across different areas. We have a participant from the academia, from government agencies, from environmental consultancies, from agriculture tech companies, and also from international organizations, such like FAO. So for graduates and young scientists to pursue their careers, this would be a really good platform for them to meet their seniors in the field. A few key growth areas, I think, include, of course, the emerging contaminants remediation. As I mentioned earlier, there is an increasing demand for experts in PFAS, microplastics, and the sustainable restoration. Another area could be, for the soil carbon and climate solutions. Of course, in our today's life, digital soil science, including AI, remote sensing, and precision agriculture. And finally, of course, policy and regulation is always an important part of the soil science, almost in every discipline. So they could work on different policy making on soil protection frameworks. All these, I think these are really good areas for young scientists to be part of. They would play a really important role in these areas. Another thing actually I like to emphasize is that employers today, they increasingly value the interdisciplinary skills. They combine soil science with the data analysis, with AI, with microbiology, or with the policy management. These for students would be a really uniquely impactful career. Because what the young scientists are doing is they are protecting the foundation for food, water, and climate.
And let me ask you about changes. Over the years that you've been involved in the conference, what are the biggest changes in the profession that have been reflected in the organization of the conference?
Well, I was, of course, I was involved with the most for this Congress, but I was participating in 2022 in Glasgow and also in 2014 and 2018. Actually, I do see a quite clear measure, some key transformative shifts in soil science. One major change these days, actually, I was talking to my graduate students as well, is the digital transformation in soil science. Today, you see soil science in many ways, we integrate with the artificial intelligence, with the big data, with the remote sensing. These are also reflected in the Congress sessions. For the 2026, we have sessions, major efforts on digital soil mapping. We have smart agriculture, and also we have global modeling. Another shift, at least for this Congress, we, the organizing committee, are making a huge effort to make sure we have the global equity and also global diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So, in the preparation for the program 2026, we prioritize diversity in speakers, sponsorship, and the topics. We made a special effort actually elevating voices from the global south, from Africa, from Southeast Asia. We try to address the equity in soil resource access. Of course, this is core to the theme for soil and the shared future humanity. And lastly, the shift, I think, for this Congress is very, very central, is the science, policy, and practice integration. We want to make sure that there is very strong link between the research and the industry and the policymakers, and we translate into practice that could be applied by the farmers. So for those who are coming for this Congress, you will see a very active interactions among different stakeholders. So, they can interact with each other, share their knowledge. I think this would be really a special feature for this Congress.
Thank you very much indeed. I wish you well in the planning and in the conference itself. Thank you for listening to this episode of Soil Matters. Please subscribe on Spotify, Acast, and Apple Podcasts to make sure that you hear the next episode as soon as it's uploaded. If you'd like to follow up any of the topics that we've discussed today, go to the podcast places of the BSSS website. And to learn more about our two journals, to become a member or discover more about the British Society of Soil Science, visit the website on soils.org.uk. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Professor Jack Hannam, and I'm a soil scientist, and I'm past president of the British Society of Soil Science. Did you know the health of our soil affects everything? Our food, our climate, our health, and our future. Formed in 1947, the British Society of Soil Science is a professional membership body dedicated to protecting, improving, and discovering new knowledge about the foundation of our planet, soil. From developing cutting-edge research, engaging with international and domestic governments through science-led policy and advocacy, to publishing in leading sector journals, and accessing extensive educational resources, our members are given the tools to be at the forefront of shaping a sustainable future. Our members are central to making a real impact and facilitating lasting change. Through access to our extensive networks, they could connect with experts and drive the conversation on soil health worldwide. Join a passionate community committed to tackling the future generational climate, biodiversity and food security challenges. Don't wait, get involved today, because soil is where it all begins, and soil matters now more than ever. Find out more at soils.org.uk.